Without further ado, I want to introduce an advertising and marketing veteran and who now leads the client-partner relationships for Facebook here in the Asia Pacific, Mr. Rahul Gupta. Please give him a hand.
Cool. Thank you. Should we wait for everyone to settle down before I get started? Start? All right, perfect. So that's my introduction. I look after some of our biggest FMCG partnership clients in Southeast Asia. And I'm here to share with you, my clicker is missing, I just realized. Sorry about that. I need a clicker, guys. Can I get a clicker? Thank you, sorry about that. Awesome, thank you. Yeah. All right, so I'm here to share with you some thoughts on brand impact in a mobile-first world. I'm not going to go into the numbers because we all know how important mobile is. We all know how much we use the mobile. I'm here to share with you some learnings. But I did want to start with an admission first. And the admission is there's no single recipe for creating brand impact in a mobile-first world. And the simple reason for that is, unlike all other channels like television, print, out of home, which have been around for decades, we've all grown up on them as we started our careers in marketing or in advertising or in any of the other industries. There was a lot of wisdom that we received from people who'd been in the industry much longer than we have been, right? And there were already some rules that had been set out, and as a result, all we needed to do to be successful in the world of television or out of home was to follow that guidebook or the playbook, if you will. However, when it comes to marketing on the mobile, all of us in this room are pioneers in some sense because we're all discovering this medium, we're all learning how it's evolving, we're all getting experiences from it, we're all seeing how consumer behavior is changing, how this hardware is changing, how the software is changing, how the pipes that supply data, they're all changing. And as a result, I'd like to believe that all of us in the room are sort of the pioneering generation which is learning how to do mobile marketing. And hence, there is no single recipe for it. Which is what brings me to the fact that rather than trying to share with you some rules or playbook, what I'd rather share with you are some of the trends we are seeing at Facebook in terms of how consumers are interacting with the mobile. Because if we understand and we have a good knowledge of how consumers are using this platform or are using their devices, I believe we can turn that knowledge, the consumer knowledge, into actionable insights, into actionable marketing programs, which will help us drive brand impact. So I'll share with you 3 such shifts we're seeing in consumer behavior. The first shift is that consumption is no longer linear. What I mean by that is, in the days of television or print, you turned on your TV, you chose the channel that you wanted to watch, and then you probably stuck around on it for the next 30 minutes, 40 minutes, or an hour. Same thing with print. You had your newspaper delivered to you in the morning, and you went through it. It was linear. That's the only thing that we did. However, when it comes to the mobile, we are jumping. We are jumping between apps, we are jumping between messaging, we are jumping between taking a picture, posting it on our social media accounts, so it's non-linear. And the other thing which is interesting is that for most of us, the mobile device is personal, right? We all have our list of apps that we have, and each of us has the ability to personalize that. And here I'd like to do a quick, it's a big group, but a quick experiment here. If you could all pull out your mobile phones, I want you to do one simple thing. Go into your phone settings. If you could all just pull out your mobile phones. Go into your phone settings. Yeah, I thought most people would have the phone in their hands, but yeah. So go into your phone settings, and in your phone settings, depending on whether you're on an iOS or Android, you will have battery usage or apps usage. Battery usage or apps usage. And if you go into that, look for, if you're in an iOS device, it will give you 2 options, last 24 hours or last 7 days. And it would do the same if you're on an Android device. So if you go into that, add up, you'll see a bunch of apps that you've been using and the percentage of battery that those apps are using. If you add it up, my guess is you'll discover a couple of things. One, you might have 25 or 30 apps on your mobile phone, but you're probably spending 80 or 90% of your time in the top 4 or 5 apps. Is that right? Yes? No? Is that what you're seeing? Anybody? You'll see your time being spent in the top 4 or 5 apps only. You might have 25 or 30 apps, right? Now what that means for us as a marketer is the fact that how do we identify what are those top 4 or 5 apps where people are really spending their time, and then how do we ensure we have a dominant presence on those apps to make an impact, right? So it's easy to get sort of confused by, oh my God, the digital world is so confusing. There are so many platforms, there are so many publishers. The reality is to create brand impact, we've got to identify where consumers are spending their time, and then we need to have dominant presence for our brands in the most meaningful way on that. The second thing I wanted to take you through is we find the behavior, the consumption behavior is super frequent. So 5 minutes into my presentation, if I start boring you, you're probably going to whip out your phone and you're going to start going through your mobile phone. So it's frequent. What we find for a platform like Facebook and Instagram, on an average, consumers in Southeast Asia check their feed 16 to 18 times a day. 16 to 18 times a day is what people are doing. So in many ways, the way I've come to think about life increasingly is either we are doing some work, productive work, or we are spending our time on the mobile phone. And we're going through all the things that are sort of hitting us, whether it's messaging, whether it's social media. So it's frequent. And as marketers, we need to recognize that and keep this in mind as we develop marketing campaigns. The third thing is the thumb is the king. This poor fellow has to do a lot of work because we're going through our feed in super fast. We're trying to consume far more content than we can ever consume in a day. We have friends, family, colleagues. People are posting information. There's so much content being generated, and we're trying to consume content worth like 2 hours in an hour and a half. So it's very fast, and this poor fellow has to do a lot of work. So in many ways, as marketers, what we need to do is to try and stop this thumb. Can we come up with great ideas, with fantastic executions, which can stop the thumb? And it can stop the thumb at our piece of marketing content so that consumer pays attention, right? And to give you some more statistics to back this up, the fact that I'm not making this up, is when we've done eye tracking studies, we found that consumers will typically take about 2.5 seconds when they're on the desktop to figure out whether that piece of content is of interest to them or not. But when it comes to the mobile feed, 1.7 seconds is all we have. Within what consumers will try and do within 1.7 seconds is to figure out whether that piece of content is worth their while or not. And then they'll move on. And here's the other interesting thing. Within that 1.7 seconds, we are finding that impact is created within a quarter of a second. Our brain is processing so much information so fast that we're able to see whether this is going to be worth my while or not before the thumb kicks into action and scrolls past. So as marketers, we have to recognize this behavior. How do we stop thumbs in an environment where consumers are taking 1.7 seconds to make a decision, and it's taking them less than a quarter of a second to register the impact of that piece of content, register it in the memory, and move on? That's the challenge we're faced with, and that's the consumer behavior. If we understand, I believe we can make an impact. The second thing is we're evolving to be a visual-first society. Everything is visual. Everything is about the camera. So over the weekend, I was at Gardens by the Bay watching the tulip exhibition, beautiful tulips. But to my surprise, I would say about 80 or 90% of the people were more busy taking pictures on their phone. So their whole view of the world was defined by their mobile phone. And they were posting pictures right there and then. So it's a visual-first world. And the other thing that's happening as a result of that is that consumers have become content creators. We heard about that from the panel just before us. People like Maker Studios are getting content creators together. So everybody, all of us in this room, can produce fairly good quality content with effects, with boomerang, with hyperlapse, with masks. There's so much content that we are all generating. In that context, the job for brands has become tougher, I would say. Right? How do you produce content that stands out in this visual sort of sea or ocean that consumers themselves are producing? So we have to pay a lot more attention to the way we tell our stories visually. The third thing is there is a mistaken belief that the mobile screen is just yet another screen, and mobile behavior is like TV behavior. So whatever works for TV, let me just put it on mobile and it'll work. What I want to suggest to you and offer to you is that mobile consumption is not TV consumption. In fact, they couldn't be further apart. Because this is what happens. The size at which we consume these things is relative to the distance at which we consume, right? And I'll explain that if you give me a second. Sorry. So typical TV watching behavior will be sitting 4, 5, 6 feet away from the TV. And how do we see our mobile phones? How do we consume our mobile phones? We consume them typically at this distance, right? That's the distance we're consuming. And very often you hear of stories of people, while they were on their mobile, they walked into a pole, they fell into a ditch, or sometimes tragically, they caused an accident. That's simply because the way our brain is processing information on the mobile is very different to the way our brain processes information when it receives it on TV. In a lot of the neuromarketing studies that we have done, what we found is when we are on the mobiles, we have a lot more attention. Our field of vision is restricted, so we're paying attention to the content, which also then explains the reason why all we need is a quarter of a second to make an impact, to understand what that brand is trying to say, and we take 1.7 seconds to make a decision about whether we move on or not. Because our brain is working at a different speed, and it's paying a lot more attention, and it's a lot more positive when we see content on the mobile screen. Whereas when it comes to TV, there is some more distraction, and there is more cognitive load on our brain. We're trying to process a lot more information. We're trying to cut out all the noise around us. So this is the other aspect we need to keep in mind about our consumers' behavior and consumption when it comes to TV versus the mobile. Both are equally important. Both have a very key role to play in building brands. But the behavior and the way consumers consume it is very different. Right? So what does it mean in terms of brand implications? How do we sort of bring this all together, and how do we start producing marketing programs or creative ideas which actually help us in creating brand impact? First thing, storytelling is incredibly important. We heard about it from the panel, whether it's in the business world, whether it's about pitching ideas, startups. Storytelling is absolutely important. And my submission is that storytelling in the world of mobile has become even more important. So to have a good team on your side, a good team of creative talent who can tell great stories and who can bring it to life has never been more important. Simply because the thumb is in control, right? If you serve somebody a piece of content or creative which is not interesting, which is boring, on TV, people will be forced to watch. At best, they might walk up and go get a glass of water or look into their phone, right? But on the mobile, the consumer is completely in control, or rather the thumb is in control. So how do you stop them? It's by telling great stories. But the way we tell these stories, we have to think about it a bit differently. First, deliver your brand early. The reason I say this is that it's not every day that you'll come up with a hit like Dove Sketches or like the Jollibee commercial for Mother's Day. So even if you haven't produced a thumb-stopping idea, if you have your brand or brand cues early enough in your content, at the very least, you would have had a chance to make an impact in the consumer's mind. They will remember your brand. You would have had an opportunity to create brand salience, even if consumers don't necessarily consume the rest of your content. Integrate your brand. Again, nothing new about it. But how do we tell brand stories, or how do we produce that piece of content where if the brand was taken away from it, the story would not make sense in the consumer's mind? You want to make sure that the impression you leave in the consumer's mind in that quarter of a second is so strong and so powerful that the brand is well integrated into it. Right? Third thing, choose stories over seconds. What I mean by that is there is a fascination for I must produce a long piece of content, or I must only produce a short piece of content. I don't think there is any magic formula for what the right length is. It needs to be as long as you want it to be if you think you have a compelling story, or as short as it can be. Consumers are going through their feed fast, frequently in sound off mode. So you have to recognize that behavior and then come up with stories which reflect that. And last but not the least, 70 to 80% of mobile consumption is in sound off mode. Probably there are a bunch of people in this room right now as I'm speaking who are going through their mobile. They're seeing content from brands, but they have the sound off. So can we make sure that all our stories come through in sound off mode? And some people tell me, oh my God, it's so difficult to do stories in sound off mode. How do we tell emotional stories? All I say is if you go back and look at, say, some of the Charlie Chaplin movies, right? In the era, for those of us who did grow up in those, watching those, I think there was emotion, there was drama, there was beautiful stories that were told in sound off mode. So we have to keep that in mind. Second thing, optimize for visual cues. The whole world, it's about camera first. It's all about pictures. Can we tell our stories visually? The old adage of a picture is worth 1,000 words is no more truth today than it was when it was probably first sort of thought of. But the whole world is going visual, so can we as brand owners, as marketers, tell our stories visually? Because visuals make so much more impact, so much more quickly, and our brain is able to process them a lot faster than say 10 or 15 written words. And use the format of the mobile. There are formats like 9:16, which are immersive formats, which take up the whole screen space. Can we bring our stories to life in that way? Last but not the least, the mobile, whether it's Facebook, Instagram, or any of the other platforms, they offer a very wide canvas to bring your creative ideas to life. So please use them to serve different types of consumers, different types of creative formats, because you never know which format is going to work the best for a different type of consumer. For example, if I'm in a country in Southeast Asia where the bandwidth or the connection speed is slow, there's no point in serving them a video, because the video is going to lag, or they may not watch it at the time that you want them to watch it, right? So it's better to serve them perhaps a small still image, or what we call a slideshow. If you're in another country where people prefer to receive their information in bite-sized pieces, it might be better to break up your complex story into smaller formats. So the mobile is a very wide canvas. Use it to your benefit, and always mix up your creative assets, and you'll have a better chance of success. So in summary, first and foremost, mobile has shifted consumer expectations. The way they interact with the platform, the way they use it has changed. We've got to keep updating our knowledge of that. And if we know that, I think we'll be able to come up with ideas that create impact. Second, get inspired to break the conventional rules of storytelling. We are all part of the pioneering generation. We are learning how this platform is evolving, how consumers are interacting with it, and use that knowledge and use it to understand how to break through the clutter. And last but not the least, play more, experiment more, learn from it. The good news about the mobile platform is there's a lot of data that will come back. You'll instantly get feedback from the platform. It's not like we need to wait for a quarter or 6 months to get a brand health tracking report. The data comes back quickly. Be careful and choiceful in what kind of data you use to make decisions, but there's a lot of data, so play more, experiment, and use that to further refine your mobile marketing strategies. Thank you very much. Yeah. Any questions around?
Hello? Any questions, anyone? Questions?
Cool.
Hi, thank you for the talk. Very, very interesting. Just a quick questions in regards to chatbots.
Yes.
In regards to how brands can actually leverage chatbots in the future.
Sure. Yeah. So chatbots, very, very new, still emerging. I think some of the earliest use cases we are seeing of chatbots is automating customer service and delivering that at scale, delivering a consistent customer service experience. So some of the categories we are seeing using chatbots a lot are banks, airlines, hotel industry, so where they want to automate customer service and do it at scale. And I think as consumers also get more used to chatbots, we'll find them making their way across all the categories. But at the moment, I would say expansion of customer service or utility-based applications are the ones that consumers are sort of gravitating towards. Yeah.
Anyone else?
Yes. Okay. Yes. that's one thing. Yeah, so what I mean by stories over seconds is that if there is a story that you can tell in 2 seconds, take that decision and tell that story in 2 seconds. There is no more. Earlier, we've been all sort of trained, and including myself, that you needed a 30-second format to tell a story, and then you needed a 15-second edit to sort of remind people about that story. Those rules don't necessarily apply in the new world. So if you think your story deserves 2 minutes and it's going to be very, very compelling, then so be it, give it a shot. But if you feel you can tell your brand story, your product story in 2 seconds, 1 second, 5 seconds, then so be it. But don't start your decision making by saying I need to stick to a length. Start your decision making or creative evaluation process by saying what's the right amount of information I want to deliver in a format where people's consumption behavior is fast, frequent, and sound off, and then find the right duration to tell your story. That's what I meant. So, and there are increasingly examples of stories that can be told in 5 seconds, right? Some of the best stand-up comedians can tell a joke in like 2 lines or 3 lines. Or some of the other guys will build up the story, bring you to it, and then deliver the punchline. Yeah. Yes. So, yeah. Yes. Correct. Yeah. So I think the way to think, the way to think about it is there are enough examples we see on the platform about, for instance, when it came to the BBC story of the interview happening in South Korea and the professor's kids walked in. That was a long story and it had 100% completion rate because the story had human interest, it had drama, people were watching it, and that was creating the network effect, right? Similarly for brands, but if you're telling a very standard brand story, then I would say, given the consumer behavior, the shorter the better. So look at, as short as it can be, would be my advice. So do not, again, start with the duration in mind, but try and really come to the what's the key message you want to deliver, and then zoom in on that. And then what you can do is you can break it up. You're not compelled to tell the entire story in one particular sort of creative idea, right? You can break up the story over several pieces. That's the other way to think about it. How do I deliver the story in bite-sized pieces of content? Yeah. Cool. Thank you very much. Thank you for your time.